Hello and welcome to season 2 of The Testing Ground, Strativ's podcast series where we discuss all things TIC with key experts in the market. I'm today's host, Owen Chandler, a senior consultant in the global consumer, wireless and E&E market. I'm joined by Johee Chang, VP of Sales at Sporton International. We'll be discussing her early days in the market, the current challenges facing wireless TIC, and how the space must evolve in the coming years. Johee, honestly, it's so nice to have you back with me here today. To kick off, can you tell us a little bit more about how you found yourself in the industry? It's everywhere, but most people don't know that TIC exists. Like I always tell you, I certainly didn't.
So I was in the same boat as you, Owen. At the start of my career, I didn't know that TIC existed, and I kind of landed in this space accidentally. So I was in my early 20s, was a recent graduate of my university and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. In fact, my mother saw a job opening for a position within TIC that required bilingual skills. And at the time I was fluent in, well, still am fluent in both Korean and English. I fulfilled kind of the number one need they had for that role. Yeah. And that's kind of how I landed in TIC is just taking that position. And then I started to learn TIC from the ground up. Yeah. But that's how I got my foot in the door.
It definitely seemed like the perfect fit when you told me that story the first time round. So obviously with the language speaking, it's difficult. So, you've answered, you kind of fell into it. And I think, a lot of people do, to be honest, whether that's TIC or a lot of industries. What I want to know is, you got pulled into TIC. What made you stick with TIC?
So that's an interesting question, actually. I have found that once I got into TIC and I started to learn the industry, kind of learn the different paths to certification, the different requirements and things like that, I found that I was in a space that I, as we kind of touched on earlier, didn't know existed. But as I got into it, I developed quite a bit of interest for the space and, getting involved with, all the different processes, learning the standards, learning what it takes to help a customer from, beginning to product launch and things like that. It really held my interest. I also loved the fact that I was really bringing value to my customers. I wasn't just, selling a commodity or, providing some kind of absolute need or something like that. It was something where I could differentiate my services from the competition and win based on kind of that merit, if you will. So it just also always captured my interest. So when you ask why I've stayed, I suppose that is a big reason. I mean, I've clearly been growing through the years in the industry. It's held my interest a great deal, and it's an exciting space to be. You wouldn't think so, but when you really get into the nitty gritty, you're dealing with some really cool product and some cool things day in and day out. So
awesome. Yeah, great answer. Now, we've kind of touched on a few things about what this podcast is about today, and really your specialism. But just for some of our other listeners that maybe don't quite work as close to wireless, I mean, what exactly is your expertise? You're part of the board at PTCRB. You're well respected in the industry. I feel like I'm allowed to say that. So what is exactly your expertise?
So I would say that my area of expertise is very specific to cellular technologies. So when I first got into the TIC space, I was specializing in, at the time, it was the launch of CDMA networks. And, after that became LTE. And now we're sitting here in the 5G space and things like that. So cellular has always been my background, where I started, what I know the best. And so, but, beyond that, through the years, I've accumulated other areas of knowledge. But when it comes to any sort of specialty, if you will, I definitely will say that, cellular connectivity, cellular certification schemes, those kind of things, paths to get those types of devices to market is where my specialty lies.
Awesome. Lots to learn. You mentioned that. I really want to understand, and for some of the newer people coming into the TIC space, I mean, what were your experiences coming into it? We've done it a bit, back to front here. We know why you stayed in the industry, but obviously it's baptism of fire is usually what people tell me.
What has been my experience been like in the industry? I would say that it has been there has never been a lack of the opportunity to learn something
Yeah,
new. It's such a dynamic and fast moving industry that you kind of always have to stay present and involved. You have to know what's going on, know of the new standards that are coming out. So it's very much a space where just kind of sitting on cruise control isn't going to work. So if that's kind of your style or your comfort zone, maybe that's not the best fit. But I think that if anyone that's looking for a challenge, looking for some type of role that is, constantly evolving and dynamic
yeah,
and changing and those things and moving with the times, this is definitely it. So when I stepped into TIC, I found that was kind of maybe one of the things that I didn't expect and then helped to keep me there was that, the ability to constantly, change with the times, change with the technologies and things like that. But you do have to stay on top of it. It's not something that you can just be passive about and expect to kind of stay on top of your game. Yeah.
yeah. I think that goes for the whole industry, really. I mean, it segues me on nicely to, where we're at in the current space, really. When we brainstormed this meeting, you mentioned that, TIC players need to be careful to properly service clients in all parts of the TIC space, especially wireless. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but yeah, do you care to explain that a little bit more?
Sure. I think as these certification schemes get more complex, and I guess what I mean by that is we see lots of technologies, newer technologies coming into the market, technologies being packaged together within one device, which is,
Yeah,
that's always kind of been the case. But now that we have, I guess, more technologies to play with, if you will, or choose from, we see more and more complex devices that can connect in multiple different ways, communicate in multiple different ways, have multiple different functionalities or use cases, and things like that. And as that happens in the marketplace, I find that there's lots of opportunities for misinformation or inaccurate
yeah,
information. And so that's why I think it's so important for, sales professionals, a lot of, especially in the tech space or
yeah,
TIC tech space,
of
there's
course.
kind of this misconception that, salespeople just have to be able to give a quote, follow up,
Yeah,
it's really simple, cut and dry. But here's where that comment kind of stems from is that if you stop there in this space as a sales professional, it is a disservice because you have to have that level of knowledge to at least give your customer the confidence that you know
yeah,
what they need to do and not anything extra on top of that. So you don't want to be over testing their
yeah,
device, right? But you have to at least make sure that they're compliant, that they take the proper steps to make sure that they're adhering with whatever, organizations are upholding those standards or requirements and things like that. And so that's why as a sales professional, even we need to have at least a baseline of that technical knowledge
yeah,
to be able to communicate accurate information into the marketplace and ensure that our customers are doing the right things and getting the right levels of approvals in order
yeah.
to legally or sell a product that is has been tested and is of high quality for their customers.
Yeah, I
So
think the automotive space is a really good microcosm for that because, you speak to people that have been in the industry for decades and,
right.
they talk about it was always exhausts or, metal testing and all of a sudden these cars have become, gadgets. There's TVs in there, there's,
Oh yeah.
AI self-driving cars for, the most obvious example. There's so much that now goes into these.
Yeah.
That a lot of people that even have been in the industry for so long feel like they're almost newcomers, and I'm probably putting words into a lot of people's mouths there, but that is definitely what I seem to see in the market. So I mean, we've kind of gone into one of the main challenges because from what you've been saying throughout, it's just a rapidly changing industry. I spoke to a VP over in Hong Kong today, and You just said the TIC space, a lot of companies really are struggling to catch up and keep up with just the amount of innovations that's going on. I mean, look at AI. There's very little, no certifications there. It's something that's going to change, and a lot of companies are going to jump on it. But doing it in the right way, training the right people, like you said, salespeople need to have that base knowledge. It's exciting. I get to look in on it. I don't have to do it, thankfully. I think for you, and this, you could probably think of quite a lot here. I want to know a little bit more about maybe a very specific, or your most challenging projects you've had to deal with in your career. Because working in the cellular space, from what I know about it, there's so many holes to jump through.
Yeah. No, that's that's a funny question, because this is a question that I get asked a lot in job interview type scenarios, whether I'm the one, the interviewee or the interviewer, right? So it's a question I've heard several times. I've had lots of very interesting, and by interesting, I do mean challenging projects. So you get enough of these projects under your belt. There never fails to be one that is just unique. The design is unique, kind of their target market segments could be unique. So a specific project doesn't come to mind, but I can think of a couple just that have happened fairly recently with pretty high profile companies. They have, a device that they've designed that they want to launch globally. They've very intentionally done testing at a different lab from the lab that they've decided to go forward and use for their, global market access or their international approvals and things like that. And it's done intentionally, I think, to keep kind of more control over the process and break it up into different labs that have expertise in these areas, right? So when things like that happen, things can get complicated very quickly, because now you've got, not only a very complex project, but you've got several different competitors touching the same project, at one point of the cycle or another. So then not only does, keeping track of the project as a whole and the movement of the project become, a primary goal, but you also have to communicate with other companies that, may or may not be partners with you. So those types of projects can get complex, and that happens more often these days than not, because like I said, the devices are getting more complicated, more complex. So the likelihood that a particular device may need to touch more than one lab, whether it's by choice of the OEM or by necessity because one lab can't cover everything, then yes, things become more complicated. There's more opportunities for issues. More so on the logistics side than, even device related. But anytime you've got more hands in the kitchen, things can get messier very quickly. So
opportunities for difficulties, that's very diplomatically put. Probably wouldn't have phrased it that way, but I don't think we spoke about that before, but that is, a really good point that, I just hadn't considered really, because yes, it's a small industry. Everyone's going after the same clients, kind of similar like recruitment to some extent. Now, I suppose on that, do you foresee any specific challenges coming up in the industry, moving forwards, or do you think it will be, the same challenges, you've experienced for the last 10 years of your career?
So I've us coming to the point where we're at now, just because now I have spent 22 years in this space. And, gosh, in the early days when I first got into this space, when CDMA was just launching and LTE was not a thing yet, there was just so much growth, and all of the labs were enjoying these, great profit margins. Everything was happy and great. Now, as we see the landscape change, and I mean that from lots of different aspects, right? So we see more complex devices, which means, maybe less SKUs, the less number of devices, the more complex they get. Because of that, the kind of landscape of the industry does change. Maybe we see it tightening up a bit. So that's kind of what we see going on now. A lot of these phones that used to have 30, 40 SKUs because they were just feature phones and they were different form factors. Now we're seeing a great deal of just one or maybe two form factors, and they're much more complex devices. They're tiny computers that we carry around. So they're producing less of them. Now, because of that, what I see happening is these kind of niche labs are getting bought up by these huge tier one TIC companies. And that's been happening, you
Yeah.
know, for the duration of my career. But I see the activity on those kind of acquisitions and merger type activities increasing a great deal just
Yeah.
within the past, I would say 8 to 10 years. I'm sure you've been
Yeah.
noticing that as well, because you're probably seeing the kind of aftermath, right? Aftermath, the
Yeah.
fallout. So when the personnel kind of overlaps, you see that coming through on your side of it. But so I will say that that is the major change, that in the early days, we knew that it was inevitable,
Yep.
didn't know how fast it would come, but now we actually see it happening. Things are changing so rapidly. We see kind of new players trying to come into the market, but this market is so tough right now that you really have to have the backing of a very large company to, you know, stay up with the investments that's needed to be able to attract and keep talented engineering staff.
Yeah.
All of those things come into play because, you know, a TIC company, it's sales is an important piece, but it really has to function as one cohesive unit in order to
Yeah.
continue to win business and to stay healthy, right? So I would say that though that is what I've noticed kind of most of all, is that the market space is getting tight, it's getting tough. The competition always seems to be rising, you know, so but it's still a very dynamic, and there's a lot of business out there, because even though the complexity rises and maybe we see some of those, you know, phone or tablet SKUs dropping, we see this whole new space of IoT devices coming
Yeah.
up. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the untapped market where companies like Sporton, you know, need to make a play and go after these other companies. The challenge there lies that these other companies don't know exactly where to go for their testing needs and things like that. And right now we're trying to bridge that gap in many ways.
Yeah.
So,
It's you've touched on so many points there. I'm trying to think where to start. I mean, I think yes, I haven't been in the tech industry that long. You know, I've been doing recruiting a good while now, but tech I'm new to. So seeing the space and how consolidated it is, but then you
yeah,
still see elements of those companies, you know, downshifts. No, I'm not going to mention any names here, but you know, you've got your own company and some other wireless players that are, you know, growing, you know, building labs and doing quite well, and then you've got other really big fish that have, you know, closed down some of their wireless labs, and
yeah.
there seems to be a real shift just because that company has big market share in hard lines, soft lines does not mean they're going to have the same market share in cellular and wireless.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah,
I think another point that I want to touch on is a little bit earlier in the conversation where you mentioned it's really cyclical. You know, you've got sales and then you've got the technical team. And, you know, I can't tell you how many sales individuals I've spoken to that have been disfranchised because they've done their job and then the technical side just hasn't been able to cope with it. There's been issues, logistical issues,
yeah.
and it's just become a real headache. And then, you know, it goes back where you've got the lab waiting for work. So I think this is a fitting point to talk a little bit more about talent specifically. You know, you fell into the industry. It's sometimes hard to sell people on the tech industry. You know, I agree with you. It is definitely versatile. It changes, you know, with whatever innovation's coming out, which is great. Not a lot of industries can say that, but you know, it's slightly lower paying. A lot of people go to manufacturers. Just educating people on what the industry does is half the challenge. So
Yeah.
with all that in mind, you know, what would you say the repercussions are of, you know, maybe not being able to attract new talent into the tech industry?
I mean, the simple answer to that is that the industry will eventually just die, right? If we can't attract a new talent into the industry, all of the existing talent will eventually move on, retire, go on
Mm.
with their lives and things like that. And what we see is a shrinking space, but that clearly that's not happening because we see so much
Yeah.
activity. so many devices popping up, so many connected type of infrastructures going in, whether it be within smart cities, smart homes, all that kind of thing. So the industry itself, the space itself is certainly not shrinking, it's growing as far as reach goes. So the need for youthful talent, for young people to get excited about TIC is definitely there. And then it's a space for so much opportunity and growth because it's not as sexy as working for a Samsung or an Apple, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't carry that brand name with it to say that you have gone to work for a, I don't know, a TUV or a UL, right? Just to name a couple of the larger labs as an example. But bringing in young talent not only keeps the industry healthy, it keeps our space healthy, but it sets us up for growth. So those of us who've been kind of working in this industry for a while, we pass our knowledge down. The youth comes up and, they've got this fresh energy and things like that. And it really is necessary to drive the industry forward because the new ideas, all of the newer technology, things like that, it's going to lie with that generation, right? So sadly, one that I'm no longer part of, I'm part of the older generation now, but never mind that. It's important to keep that youthful kind of those ideas and things in the industry and alive. And just like I said before, just so that we can stay on a growth path and keep the industry healthy and keep the talent on the testing side as well as the development side, because somebody needs to test those devices. And so, I think it's important all around.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And look, it was kind of a loaded question about, the repercussions, because you're absolutely right. That despite being somewhat feeling like a small industry, it's actually very large. There's a few key opinion leaders, but there's plenty of new blood coming into the industry. A lot of people really find their niche in that space. Now, I suppose going back to where we started with this, your challenges coming into the TIC industry, I mean, what do you think the challenge is for fresh blood coming into TIC right now, whether that's straight out of university coming into a technical role, or they've been doing sales in solar panels for the last year and then they've moved into TIC. What would you say the challenges are for those?
So listen, I like that question a lot, Owen, and here's why. I don't come from an engineering background. So here I am. I have been so lucky or fortunate in my career path to have met kind of the right people and key contacts to help me grow my career to where I'm at now. But my path is not a traditional path. So when you look at a lot of people in my industry, maybe not on the sales side so much, but when you go and look at the operation side or the technical side, everyone has, engineering degrees. They come from very highly technical backgrounds. They maybe came from an internship at a major manufacturer or something like that.
Yeah.
My background is much different. I studied business in school. I have my MBA. And as we spoke at the very beginning of this conversation, I fell into TIC by accident, really. So I think that a big takeaway from that is for people not to shy away from TIC just because they don't have the so-called resume pedigree that they think they ought to have. I think that this is it's an industry where you can get out of it what you put into it. So did I have a higher learning curve than somebody who might have come out of university with a double E degree? I absolutely did. Yeah. But I put in the work. I learned it. Now, can I sit down and speak to a development engineer about the design of their antenna? Probably not, but I could at least hang in that conversation enough to know what they need to do if they want that particular device with that antenna to be successful in the marketplace, right? So it's really kind of tailoring what you need to learn to what your goals are and to never stop learning, really. So I would highly encourage people from different types of educational backgrounds, or maybe if you're even looking to make a career change, if you're willing to put in the work, You have the ability to learn new skills. Obviously, that's going to be an important piece, but it's accessible to anybody who has the desire. And I think that's
Yeah.
the important takeaway. You don't have to be an engineer by title. You don't have to be a double E. You don't have to have like a master's in, I don't know, mechanical engineering, all of that kind of stuff. Is it a nice to have? Sure, it's a nice to have, but this is something that you come into the TIC industry, you can learn it from, pick a few mentors or latch onto a senior salesperson and shadow them. It's something that experience can definitely make up the gap of a formal education, but the effort has to come from within.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a really good point. And really good advice for people coming into the industry. Now, at the start of the conversation, I introduced you, mentioned VP of Sales at Sporton International. Now, not mentioning many names in this podcast for, by purpose, but I do want to take a bit of time to actually talk about your new venture here because, you've probably feels like you've been there a bit longer now, but it was actually quite recent that you joined that team. So, yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about Sporton?
yeah, of course. So Sporton is one of the leaders when it comes to the specific kind of wireless connectivity niche and the regulatory testing along with, cellular conformance and things like that. We are a smaller lab when you look at overall size in comparison to some of the other tier ones in the space, like the TVs and the ULs and the SGSs.
Of course.
However, when you look at our department, the tech or the connected devices department, which is what a lot of the labs are kind of calling this segment. We're one of the largest. We have one of the largest capacities. We have a large reach. We do business with many of the international manufacturers, device manufacturers, chipset manufacturers, and things like that. So, and Sporton is very well known in our space, maybe lesser known amongst the large tech companies for the reasons that I've just stated. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, again, I'm sure there's things you probably can't tell us, but in terms of, the future, I mean, is there any exciting projects on the horizon for Sporton International?
So, very nice segue, Owen. There are very exciting things happening. So in fact, my decision to join Sporton kind of comes with the growth path that we are aiming towards. And you're going to see a lot of growth and a lot of activity come out of Sporton over the next, especially three years. There's going to be a lot of exciting activity. A lot of it has to do with, the growth of the US, the growth of my team. So yes, as you mentioned earlier, in this kind of challenging space right now, where you see some of these huge giants kind of pulling back or unfortunately having to close up shop or change strategies, Sporton has managed to find growth, and we're on an upward path to grow our presence in the US, and lots of exciting things happening. I can't talk specifically about them, but I think this gives you a big hint that there are things happening. Yes.
Thought it might catch you off guard, but yeah, we'll definitely keep our eyes out for that.
Yeah.
Well, look, obviously, Johee, that about wraps up. And I mean it when I could say I could spend, a lot longer talking about all this with you. But I also want to make sure we keep this to a 30-minute segment. So for any of our listeners, in light of today's podcast that do have more questions for either myself or Johee, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me through LinkedIn. I can put you in touch with Johee and we can answer your questions there. But yeah, Johee, thanks again for being a good sport and joining me on this podcast to talk everything TIC Wireless.
Of course. It was a pleasure.
Well,
thank you,
excellent.
Owen.